Everybody know? There you go. And welcome everybody to our weekly moment. So we're talking about humanizing transformation. We are talking about modern mindset. This is the world that we are in. And if we want to succeed in transformation, of course, what we need to do is humanize it. And how do we humanize transformation? Understand and apply the concept of modern mindset. And today's theme is the habit of transformation. So we're talking about that amazing world of habit, which is so incredibly important when it comes to really successful transformation and humanizing transformation. So really making it about the human. So as always, I start with a lovely little quote. And the quote that I've got here is, people don't resist change itself, they resist being changed. And you know, that is so important, especially when we're talking about habit. Why? Because it is so important for us to try and get people to want to and to be the change that they want to see, as opposed to being a little bit more kind of, you know, push orientated with change and behavioral change, change management, project management, etc., etc. So I think this quote really is less about thinking about habits. It's more about a little bit of a reminder for us to understand that we want to empower the people within transformation, the humans within transformation, to make it all work. And that brings us to today's subject and theme, the habit of transformation. So I'm going to start by just asking everybody, think to yourself, pop it into chat, speak out aloud. Do you know what these three numbers relate to? We have got 45, we have got 66, and we have got 100 trillion. Jiminy cricket, we've gone from 45 to 100 trillion. I wonder whether you know what any, if not all of these numbers relate to. So I'll give you a thought, a moment just to think about that. And what I will do is I will give us the big drum roll and reveal.
Do we get a hint, Mel?
Oh, I can't hit. Okay, well, okay. So 45. We've got habit, and we've got two areas of our brain, and that's what the 45 relates to. The 66 relates to the development of habits, and the 100 trillion relates to the science of our brain.
Can I take a wild guess and say it takes 66 days to change a habit and 100 trillion neural connections to form a lasting habit?
Oh, you're so close. That is brilliant, Dilyn. So yeah, nearly there. You're pretty much there, actually. So 45 is the percentage of our day that we are operating in habit mode. 45% of our day is habitual. 45% of our day is habitual. So if you're thinking about that in the work environment and you're thinking about transformation, oh my God, is it not obvious for us to be actually understanding and designing habits as part of any project or program that we're involved in? So that's the 45. 66 is how many days it takes to establish a habit. Not to embed a habit, but to establish a habit. It is a mean average. So it can be as little as 14 days. It can be as much as 268 days, but 66 is the average. And you're absolutely bang on, Dilyn. 100 trillion is the amount of neurons firing and wiring in our brain at any given moment. Now, the 100 trillion here relates to the brain and our mind. There are also additional trillions of neurons firing and wiring in our heart and also in our gut. So, and there's a webinar that we had a few months ago that talked specifically to that. So that's something for us to be thinking about. The next thing I want to do is just, I'm not a neuroscientist, but what I do want to do is I just want us to understand a little bit about the science of habit in order for us then to start to consider it after today immediately for ourselves, or indeed for the work that we are involved in with change and transformation. So the first thing I've got here is the basal ganglia, and the basal ganglia is the place in the brain where habits are made. The prefrontal cortex is where thoughts are made. Caveat: they're not necessarily two separate things. They do interrelate with each other. So, you know, it's not to think about them as uniquely separate to each other, but it is really good for us to understand that the basal ganglia is where our habits are made. And there are two elements about the basal ganglia that are important for us to recognize when we're coming to designing and delivering transformation. The first thing is this: basal ganglia area of the brain is also the area that is involved in fight, flight, or freeze. It is also the area where a brain governs emotion. So when you're thinking about that, the world of habits in design and delivery of transformation, going to have a little bit of messiness, right? Because habits are always going to be intrinsically involved in fear, flight, or fright and emotions. So be aware of it when we're working on them. The next thing, of course, is the neural pathways. So a neural pathway is essentially the unique cells that are part of a brain are called neurons. And when two neurons fire, we create a neural pathway. When they fire again and again and again, and enough times repeatedly, they create a pathway that is a habit. And once that pathway has been created, it cannot be broken. And if we continue to exercise that habit, it becomes more and more unconscious. And the neural pathway, what the brain does is it starts protecting that neural pathway, because the brain is lazy and it loves patterns and it loves habits. So what it will do is it will start covering that neural pathway, which with what is called a myelin sheath, and that protects it. So it goes from just firing to repeatedly firing to create a pathway. And then as that repetition continues, that pathway gets deeper. And then the brain says, oh my God, this is amazing. It's a habit. Let's protect it. And it grows a myelin sheath around it. That's oversimplified, but it's a really important thing for us to know. You cannot break a habit, but what you can do is you can weaken it, because that myelin sheath requires effort to maintain that lovely covering. So if we're building good habits and we're weakening habits that no longer serve us, that myelin sheath will start to erode or weaken over time, and that's what we're weakening. The next thing that I've got here is dopamine. And dopamine is one of the 4 key chemicals that happen in brain activity. And dopamine, if we don't already know it, is the pleasure. It's the high. It gives you that real woo. And that's what we want to be aware of. So dopamine is incredibly important when we're thinking about habits at scale, when we're thinking about habits as part of transformation, because dopamine, what creates dopamine? Motivation, reward, incentive, etc., etc., etc. So we really need to be aware of, we have to have dopamine chemical generated and being created in our brain if the habit is going to stick and last and become something that is unconscious. So we need dopamine. And the final thing that I've got here, of course, is neuroplasticity, which is a relatively modern science that says this: it doesn't matter what firing and wiring is happening in our brain and what neural pathways are already there, we can now create new ones. And it is amazing what we can create. So neuroplasticity says that we can indeed change our identity. Years ago, it was believed that who we are is who we are as a result of our childhood, as a result of our self-esteem, as a result of self-critic, etc., etc. But now it is understood that that is not the case. We can indeed change our identity. And that is important for us to recognize and know, because that means that who we are is changing as a result of transformation, not just what we do. So everything here in terms of the science of habit is oversimplified, but super, super important for us to know as change and transformation practitioners. The next thing that I want to do is just make sure that everybody is aware of what I've got here up on the screen. So a habit is an unconscious thing that happens. So basically, we're not aware of it. It's something that happens that we are completely unaware of, and it happens 45% of the time in our day. It's unconscious, but it's consistent and it's repeated. It happens time and time and time again. That's a habit, unconscious. We also have in our daily life and at work routines. But routines are not necessarily habits, because routines we can be conscious of. I routinely go downstairs at lunchtime so that I can have something to eat. It's not necessarily habitual because it doesn't happen at the same time every day, but I do need to and want to have lunch every day. So I have a routine of having lunch. Routines are conscious thoughts, conscious effort and practices, ways of working that we have within our personal and professional lives. Sometimes if a routine is repeated and it's got the right conditions, it can flip over and become a habit. But not all routines are habits. That's really important for us to know. Some routines become habits, but not all routines are habits. Routines are conscious, habits are unconscious. And also we have single actions, which is a decision that we make. And once I've done it, I've done it. So it's kind of like when it's done, it's done. Like if you've ever gone to a shop to buy some clothes and you see that rail and it says, when it's gone, it's gone. You're absolutely right. That's the single action. Okay. So we can change that relatively easy. And that's where most of change and transformation is designed, is on the right hand side here, because it's the easiest stuff. And if we can get somebody to do something once, we believe that they'll do it again and again and again. And you know, the holy grail of change has happened, but it hasn't, which is why 84% of transformations are forecast to fail. Really, really interesting. So we want to get into the world of habit that might be harder to break, but actually gives us real transformation because it's where we're changing identity. The concept of the habit, if we're looking at the science of habit and bringing it into our lives, how we identify and start changing habits is called a habit loop. Now, there are gurus out in the world of habit. We have BJ Fogg, Tiny Habits. We have Charles Duhigg, the father of habits. We have also James Clear, the modern kind of habit guru. And James Clear's work, I will say, I love everybody else's work, but I do tend to gravitate to James's work because it is so aligned with our own framework, the Dilyn Way. But and so this loop here is James Clear's work. The loop that BJ Fogg and Charles Duhigg talk to is the cue, routine, reward. So they look at the 3-step habit loop. James Clear tends to help people to go through a 4-step habit loop. The cue, so the thing that I'm already doing, or the trigger, the craving, the motivation, the response, the action that I'm going to repeat, the actual habit itself, and the reward, the dopamine, because if I get the dopamine, I'm likely to do it again. So really, really important. Now, the cue is very important for us to recognize, because the cue is really, really important for us in the world of transformation, and especially transformation at scale. Because if you're thinking about the work environment and you're trying to help people to change who they are, not necessarily just what they do, then cues become incredibly important to us when we're designing identity shift, which is essentially habit shift. So we can look at these 5 cues that James Clear talks about. Time. What are the things that people habitually do at the same time? What are the things that people habitually do when they are in that space or in that location? What are the things that people habitually do that are action orientated or event orientated? For example, when I come into work every day, the first thing I do is sit at my desk and open up my laptop, or go to the kitchen and make my cup of tea and get my favorite mug out of the top cupboard, etc., etc. So what are the tiny little actions or events that I habitually do that are called preceding events, because they will precede what we might design as the habit? The 4th one, which is the emotional state, is quite an interesting one, because the reason why the emotional state is interesting is that it's more likely for us to uncover the emotional state as a negative habit rather than something that's positive. So it's very easy for us to see people that are procrastinating, that are bored, that are showing vulnerability in terms of they're scared, they're leaning out of things. You know, the sense of emotion that we get, the emotional state, is more likely to uncover negativity. So it's good for us to understand that fourth cue in order for us to recognize where there are areas that we might want to support positively. And of course, other people are a cue. You know, pop over and just say hello to my boss every day, knock on the door and say hi. The influence of people around us. And if you think back to the last few webinars that we've talked about positive intelligence, we've talked about positive relational energy and those amplifiers that are in our organization. So people, other human beings, are also cues. So that's the habit loop. You can go to different areas and have a look at that. And I'm just having a look at in the chat here, curious to hear whether you have experimented with BJ Fogg's tiny habit tactics, whether you experienced any success with them. That's a really, really good question. So tiny habits, have I experimented with them? Yes. Have I had a lot of success with them? Not really. And I think the reason for it is, when it comes to transformation, and this is a generalization, so this is only my lived experience to share a response with you on this one, Dilyn. I think what is more important is for us to understand what is the tiny seed of the overall identity that we're moving towards, or the overall new way of working. What's the tiny seed? So for me, I think it's less about the entire habit being small, and it's more about the first step of the habit being tiny. So that's another reason why I gravitate to the world of James Clear. Notwithstanding, I have used some of Fogg's work in my own personal life for different things in terms of kind of, you know, cookery and stuff like that. But it's more to do with a specific skill than a way of being. Just personal experience. But it'd be interesting to see whether you've experimented with it at all, and whether it's worked with you. But I think the distinction when it comes to transformation at scale is tiny is about what is the seed that we can design and support and give it everything that it needs for it to grow itself from the human being, as opposed to us doing it based on that opening quote that I had. Does that make sense? Yeah? Cool. Excellent. Alrighty. So when we're thinking about change and transformation at scale, there are some things that I think can help us. So the first thing is understanding that, and by the way, you can go to Google, and there are so many different schools of thought, and academic literature is out there in the millions, and you can see 7 types of habits, and 4 types of habits, and 3 types of habits, and 10 characters of habits, and so on and so forth. You know, you can go and explore all of it. But for us, we like to just settle in on simplicity, because the simpler the design, the more likely it is to be effective and succeed. So for us, the 3 types of habit that we always work with are the mental habit, the character habit, and the physical habit, otherwise known as the intellectual habit for mental, the emotional habit for character, and the motor habit for physical. Now, if we add that into the lexicon of our framework and humanizing transformation, the mental and the intellectual habit is our thinking. How do we think? The character and emotional habit is our feelings and the behavior. How do we show up? How do we perform that action? And the physical and the motor habit, of course, is the productivity, is the actual actions, the steps, the things we do, the tangible actions that we take to produce whatever we are producing within a work environment. We always say when you're working at transformation at scale is go to the physical, go to the productivity habits first. Why? They're easy to see. They're more likely to be visible. It's easier to talk to people about them. It's easier to change them because they're action orientated. So go to those areas first, and then, you know, you will naturally be able to deepen and widen into why you are doing them and how you are doing them. So that's the first thing. So always start with productivity. The second thing is when we're designing habits for transformation at scale, it is incredibly important for us to design with the end in mind. We're not wanting to design from where we are here. We're wanting to design from the future state, because obviously it's a journey of identity shift towards a future identity. So it makes sense to design from that future identity. Now, how do you do that? Is there something that can support us? Absolutely, yes, there is. And it's what you can see here, the 7 mindsets of modern leadership and modern business. So thinking about, you know, who we are becoming as a result of this transformation, whether it's a structural transformation, a technology transformation, it doesn't matter. But who we are becoming is going to change as a result of it. And if we tap into these 7 mindsets, they can really help us to literally design a day in the life of Jane or Simon or John or Janet, whoever, in the future state. And that is really important for us to do, a step that we don't tend to spend enough time on in the world of transformation because it takes effort. But as I was saying this morning to a group of practitioners, lock that door, get yourself in a room with the right people, and don't come out of that room until you have really done that future visualization, so that you can absolutely see a day in the life of, you know, who we are becoming. The other thing that is really important is for us to understand who our early adopters are, because you need to seed role models. You need to be able to have people that can visibly show these new habits in order for other people to just experience them. And more likely to have a go themselves. So what we do is we use our 5 Ps. So people that are absolutely clear on profile, people who are absolutely demonstrating purposeful work, purposeful practices in the organization, people who have got that presence, that charisma, who are able to be in the moment and not be worrying about the other things that they were doing yesterday and how is it going and what's my boss going to say in the next meeting. But the people that are present, that have got that charisma, that can work in the moment of now, find them, work with them, bring them on board. They are amplifiers. People that are prepared. And what we mean by prepared is prepared for the future. They are thinking about the future. They are okay and courageous and happy about the future. So they are really future orientated. Find them, bring them on board into your group of champions. And the final one is the positive relational energy. Where are those positive energizers, the amplifiers of positive energy? Bring them on board. And everybody will have a mixture of people that have got strength in these 5 Ps. Bring them on board. They are your early adopters. Oh my goodness, I cannot tell you, if you've got a diversity of those 5 Ps that you're working with on bringing habit at scale to transformation, you are really ramping up your success probability. Really important. So thinking about ourselves and our own framework, we do have what's called the habit cycle. And I mentioned earlier on with the comment that Dilyn put into the chat about BJ Fogg's work on tiny habits. Yes, really relevant. But the most important thing for us when we're working at transformation at scale is to build the habit. So we are designers of the bricks of habit to enable the individual humans within our system to embed it. We can't embed a habit. Only our own habits. It is the people within the system, the humans within the system. They are the only ones that will be able to embed the habit. So what we want to do is we want to be designing support mechanisms for establishing the seed, then activating the full habit, and then sustainably repeating and supporting them in order to embed the habit. Super, super important. So establish, activate, and embed are what we want to be looking at when we're thinking about habit as at transformation at scale. So very briefly now, what I want to do is I just want to talk a little bit more about the specifics of designing and delivering habit work at scale for change and transformation. And I've already kind of mentioned one, haven't I, really, which is talking about the 5 Ps and bringing champions on board. It is very important for us to understand who are going to be our role models or our early adopters. We want champions. We want a small percentage of leaders by label, not just profile, but label also. We want them on board and role modeling. And we also want to make sure that we've got those positive energizers, because the positive energizers give us contagious. They're the contagion. The leaders give us the permission, and the champions give us the trust. So get them all in, bring them on board as your role models. And again, you're upping the probability for success. The other thing as well is that more often than not, when you're looking at change and transformation, there will be somebody that has got a responsibility in a traditional change or transformation project or program to map the processes or to map the as is state. Yeah, we've all been there. We've all probably done it, or we know somebody that is responsible for that. We've already got that in change and transformation. So going to sit down with that person and helping them to understand that not only is it just the structural processes that we want to map, but we also want to map the habits, the rituals, the things that the individual might not even know they're doing themselves. It's a lock and a key. You know, instead of thinking that we have to build a brand new piece of work to map the habits of the human system, if we've already got somebody that's doing, you know, process mapping, the current state, just get them on board, get them to understand habit work, get them to understand observational techniques, and then map the habits, because habits are only de facto processes, but they're inside our brain. Whereas structural process mapping in change and transformation is the external stuff. Put the two things together, again, you've upped the probability of success for transformation because you've got value, you've got real power to design to. The other thing is talking about habits. And this is an interesting one, because if you have a look at the research says that because habits are part of human nature, because habits are relevant to every single human in the system, it's a really good thing to talk about them, to get people to know what a habit is, to understand what a habit is, because it's not a brand new skill to be worried about, like digital or a new technology. It's not something to be scared about. It's part of everybody's life. It's part of who everybody is because it's identity. So talk about habits. And when we talk about habits, it is proven that people then start to become aware naturally of their habits and other people's habits. So again, what you are doing is you are setting yourself up for success. So what I've got here really is 3 very important things to consider to set yourself up for success when it comes to humanizing transformation at scale. And that, I think, to be fair, everything here is pretty doable. It's relatively easy for us to instigate within an existing transformation program if it's already in flight, which is good news for us all to humanize transformation. Getting really into and under the skin of designing and delivering transformation, this is where these 7 elements come into play. So the first thing is, when we are looking at mapping those habits, mapping those rituals that people are doing, we really are starting to understand what matters to them. It matters to me to go and talk to my boss or my colleague every morning just to see that they're okay, to you know, before I start my day. It matters to me to make that cup of tea before I start my day because it gives me a little bit of a boost and an energy. It matters to me to go for that run at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because it gives me a second wind for those meetings that I've got in the afternoon. Start mapping the habits and the rituals of humans, and you will find what matters. When you find what matters, you've got the cues. And when you've got the cues, you can start shifting habits. And when you're shifting habits, of course, you're shifting identity. When you have got those cues, you've found what matters, you can then seed the habits into them or next to them. So seed the habit, that just means what's the tiniest thing to start the habit? And James Clear talks about this in a really, really powerful way. He talks about a runner, and he talks about somebody that wants to go from 0 to, from couch to 5K. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to put on your running shoes and get out there and run 5K on day one, because you can't. What you might think is, oh, you know what, I'm sure I'll be able to, run to the top of the hill and back. And that might be only 1.5 K, but actually you don't even do that. What he says is you break the habit down to its foundational first principle. And the first principle that he talks about in the analogy and the story of running is this: putting on your running shoes. That's the seed habit. So what he encourages you to do if you want to run 5K is put your running shoes on, walk around the house, don't even leave the house, and then take them off, and then put them on and take them off, and put them on and take them off. No fear, but what you're doing is you're establishing and you're seeding the habit. So thinking, as long as we have designed the future state and identity in our transformation, and we look at what the cues are, what matters to people, what we can do is we can reverse engineer that back to habits. And then once we think about a habit, which is a new way of working or a new way of being, a new way of thinking, we can then break that down into the seed. And if we break it down into the seed and connect it to what matters, then organically we can give it everything that it needs to grow from there. And that's super important. And there's something really great here, which is Google Whispers. And I don't know whether you've ever heard of Google Whispers before, but Google really wanted to establish a consciousness at their management level of psychological safety. Now, they knew that they could put all of their managers on psychological safety training, but they also knew that 50% of that training would be lost at the end of the program, and 80% of that training would be lost over 3 months. But psychological safety is so incredibly important to them, and it was a priority. So they needed to think about something else. How do we make it a habit? How do we build habits? So they looked at this concept, and what they recognized was that what matters, what was important to all of the managers at Google was this: email. Email is a method of communication that still matters in Google. So what they did was they created what are called whispers. And whispers are literally that: tiny little things on the back that are whispering in your ear. And they're just tiny little whispers that they emailed the managers on the same time every day, just a tiny one sentence that was a wee bit of a reminder of the psychological training safety. And what they were doing is they were sparking the neuron again. So when you learn something new, you spark in your brain. Neurons are firing. And then the first email whisper sparked it a second time. And then the second email whisper sparked it a third time, and a fourth time, and a fifth time, until it got to the point that they had a neural pathway. And the managers started exercising psychological safety in their ways of working. They didn't need to be hit over the head with a hammer. They were doing it naturally. The seed was growing. So super important, which brings me to the third point, which is be consistent, because our brains love routine. Everything has got to be consistent. And number 4 is always honoring what we call the law of Maya: most acceptable yet achievable. We don't want that habit to be too much too soon. Break it down to its first principle seed. Seed the habit. Seed the habit, and then give the human being water. Give the human being warmth and sunlight, support, and everything that they need to grow their own habits. We don't grow other people's habits. We grow our own. And design with the end in mind, I've talked about. But what I also want to talk about is number 6 and 7. I mentioned earlier on dopamine as one of the 4 things around the science of habit that we all need to know. What I've got here is, when it comes to transformation, when it comes to bringing habit into transformation, so we're humanizing it, we're changing who we are, not what we do. Boy, we have to really double down on dopamine. We have got to make sure that the chemical of dopamine is in that brain of that person with that seed, supported by the routine, as much as possible. So it's not choosing something to motivate them, incentivize them, reward, recognize, or gamify. It's making sure that we are exercising every single one of those bits. Motivate them by giving them something that is really, really, really valuable to them. Incentivize them, dangle the carrot. Reward them by saying, what you did yesterday was fantastic. Thank you for that. Recognize something by saying, I love what you're doing. Do more of it. It is brilliant. And play. Bringing in gamification so that you can make it a little bit childlike, not in terms of funny, but just serious play, and some of the principles of Lego. And the final one that I want to share with everybody today is monitoring, tracking, and measuring. When we think about monitoring, tracking, and measuring, the first thing that comes into play is reporting. What do we want to report to the business? What do we want to report to the transformation team at the end of the month? This is not what we're talking about here. What we are talking about is we are talking about generating and sharing monitoring, tracking, or measurement to the user. So design the way that you monitor and track and measure for the user's benefit, not the business. User first, business second. And if we can build, design, and deliver these 7 things within our transformation, we have really ramped up and charged up the probability of success for transformation. It's so incredibly important for us. So there are tools that we can use as well. And I just want to very, very quickly talk to you about establishing the habit, which I mentioned earlier on, that seed. How do you do that? Well, we have a mechanism called a habit canvas. And a habit canvas allows you to, if you know what the new way of working is, you can use the habit canvas to break it down to its seed. So it's a really, really cool thing. The other thing is transparency. If you can build transparency, then do that. And we have something that's called a habit plan for that. And equally, the Google Whisper technique, tiny and regular, tiny little nudges, because it's nudge theory really, is getting those in play. And that's what we've got. This is an example of our habit canvas. These are available to everybody that works with us and all of our practitioners. Really important for us to look at the habit canvas. The next thing is habit plans. So we create habit plans and we work with teams to build habit plans. We work with teams to build habit plans around leaders working together. And you can use this at an organizational level to build transparency. And we also have the app that we work on, and the app you can work on when you're mentoring and coaching. You can build community within the app that we have as well. And it allows the individuals to identify their own habits from the seed and to track their habits and to share with others. And we can gamify within the app as well. And this is just how our habit tracker looks inside. So we've got, some tools that allow us to support an individual or at scale within an organization, the habit of transformation. As always, in our webinar, I just want to let everybody know that there are different pathways for us all to engage with modern mindset and humanizing transformation. There is the foundation training, which is a simple 2-day training on the theory with a certificate at the end of it. There is our practitioner training, which adds practice hours and one-to-one mentoring to it. And of course, there is also our mentoring certificate. And the mentoring certificate is where the practitioner is licensed to use our profiling tool and to use our mentoring and coaching program with 1 to a few others. So there are 3 different pathways that individuals within the world of transformation can engage with our framework of modern mindset and humanizing transformation, to access all of those tools as well, of course. If you would like to learn more, if you want to understand, if you've got a little bit of a niggle or a scratch around what I've talked about today in terms of habits, and you would like to know a little bit more, Absolutely, please do. You know, I always say this, Thursday afternoons are my golden time for working with people with no obligation whatsoever, but just pro bono to help individuals to think about themselves, to think about the transformation program that they're on or that they're leading. So that's what my Now Future mapping opportunity is. It's 1 hour with me on a Thursday afternoon. And if you'd like to take advantage of that, then please do either pop into the chat or DM me via LinkedIn or via Instagram or via email, mel.ross@adapt2digital.com, and we will have a look at your journey that can be just amplified. There's one thing that I haven't talked about today, which is a little bit of a holy grail and something that we can sometimes design and identify at the beginning of transformation, but more often than not, it uncovers itself when we're in it. So when we're in it and we're doing it, which is why monitoring and measurement and tracking is so incredibly important, we can more often than not uncover it. But sometimes we can design at the start, and it's what we call the keystone habit. And the keystone habit is a small positive habit that, when performed regularly, leads to a chain reaction of other positive habits. Now, if we can get 3, 4, or 5 keystone habits in play around transformation at scale, can you imagine what that would do to accelerate transformation success? Super, super important. So what does a keystone habit give us in transformation? It gives us an accelerant. It's an accelerant. So that's what's so important. So if we're looking out for keystones, that is really important. I'll go back just to explain to you what a keystone is, to the analogy of running. When we start running or maybe start exercising, that becomes habitual to us, or going to the gym every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and that becomes my routine, and eventually that might become a habit. When that becomes a habit, that it is ingrained within us, and that is almost unconscious, certain other things start to happen. We start to think about what we're eating. We become a little bit more conscious of nutrition. We start, when we're losing weight, become a little bit more conscious of how we look and our own kind of persona. So we maybe start changing the way we dress. When we're in conversations with people, our self-esteem is just increased. So we're a little bit more courageous. We're more likely to challenge. We're more likely to engage in conversation. All of these things are additional positive habits that have happened as part of the chain reaction of that first initial keystone. Oh my goodness. Keystone habits, if we can identify them as part of transformation at scale, super, super, super important for us. So there we go, bringing today's session to a summary. What are some of the things that I would say to us? The first thing that I would say is always plan with the end in mind. That is something that I notice that a lot of practitioners don't necessarily spend the time in doing, or they do it half-baked, not because they're lazy, it's just because it takes effort and it's hard. But if we have got the observational data and we're looking at process mapping as well as habit mapping and rituals, then we will be able to do that, on the proviso that we understand the vision and the moonshot. It is important for us also to understand that only 2 active habits at any one time. So when you're thinking about habits, habits really are otherwise known as paradigms and mental models. And it is proven that we can only really work on 2 paradigms at one time. So we don't want loads of habits happening within a system, a human system. We only want a particular human being to be working on a maximum of 2 habits at any one time. The other thing to remember about habit work as well is this: there's no weakness in it. Habit work is only positive, it's only growth, it's only strength-based. It's brilliant. So get habit work in if you're not already doing it. If you're stuck and you've got some really, really negative things happening around transformation, get some habit work done. Tiny little habit work. Watch out for keystones without question. And also the penultimate one that I've got here, which is a super one that I haven't mentioned today, and it is really important, is this: habits are what sustain transformation. Now, I mentioned a keystone earlier on as an accelerant. Last week, we were talking about positive intelligence and positive energy. They're all accelerants. They speed up transformation. What habits do is sustain transformation. It's very different, because what they do is they change who we are and our identity, which means that when the project and the program have gone, if we've delivered work on habits, then we've got lasting change, which means that we've allowed the inside out approach to flourish. Super, super, super important for us. So think about habits sustaining transformation beyond the project or the program. Super, super important. And just to finish off today is banana skins. So what are the banana skins here? This is a banana skin, which is really important, measuring for the business first, because you know what, we get forced to do that. But let's not, when it comes to habit work, measure for the business first. Measure thinking about the user in mind, so that they are able to visibly see, monitor and track their own habits. And just noticing the chat there, yes, it is an app that we've developed ourselves, Dilyn. Yeah, absolutely. So it's our app. And also the final thing for me is being assumptive. The world of habits is science. It's backed by science. The science is there. So we do not need to be assumptive when it comes to habit work. Everything there is scientific. It's proven. We've got academic research to back us up. So we don't need to be working with habits when people are thinking it's wishy-washy, mystical, or voodoo hoodoo. It's not. It's science, and we can follow the science, which is absolutely brilliant. So there's no excuse for us to be assumptive. And I think that's a really important element when it comes to using habits for transformation at scale. And I guess that's it for today. So, you know, positive habits are contagious. There is no negativity when it comes to the world of habits being introduced to transformation at scale. And a lovely little quote here just to end. Do you know, nobody really knows where this quote came from. It's attributed to Einstein, but nobody really knows whether it is Einstein's quote or not. Compound interest is the most powerful force in the universe. You think about that tiny little habit, and you think about that habit rippling out to other people and other people and other people. Can you imagine how that can change an organization, not just the project and program? Super, super important. The power of habits when it comes to transformation at scale cannot be underestimated. So what a great little quote to end on today's session. So thank you everybody for joining. If you'd like to know more about anything that I've talked about today, then please just be in touch with me. Again, Mel Ross Digital on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and my email, mel.ross@adapt2digital.com. And I'm more than happy to give you a little bit more insight or some literature to understand a little bit more about what I've talked about today. So there we go, habits. What are you going to think about today? I hope that you are going to be a little bit more aware of habits in any change or transformation project or program that you're involved in, because it is a powerful tool to add to your arsenal of transformation, little goods and nickies in that bag that you've got. So take care, everybody, and hopefully I will see you next week. So take care, everybody. Thanks again for joining. Bye-bye.